Hi everyone, and I'd like to talk very briefly about Lissa, which of course is a book that I asked you to read for this course. And then I'm going to share a few thoughts and reflections on the midterm, which you will be taking shortly. So, we don't have any time set aside in this course to discuss the ethnography at length, but I will encourage you to listen to a portion of the clip, which I have put up on the Scholar page. Please listen from minute 3, number 50 to 7 minutes into the video. So again, I'll encourage you to pause this video and go ahead and open up to the video, which features the author of Lissa, Shireen Hamdi, and listen to the portion of that video that I have indicated here. So this is an ethnographic graphic novel, which you have read for this course. Lissa is, as you can see, obviously a graphic novel, and that it's primarily images, but also some dialogue from the characters. It is loosely based off of fieldwork, actual ethnographic fieldwork and research that Shireen Hamdi did as a part of her scholarship as a scholar of Egypt and organ transplants, that sort of thing. But she wanted to also create a kind of ethnography that would be more accessible to a broader audience, not just other anthropologists, not even just other anthropology students, but people who might not be familiar with anthropology. Right. So it has ethnographic qualities. Again, it's based on research that she did in Egypt on similar themes, but it is ultimately a fictional account. Like, she's created this story to kind of touch upon some of the issues and themes that she saw in her own research. One way in which it's like not a real ethnography is the fact that there is no anthropologist here, right? This is a story she's just sort of looking at. And a real ethnography, as you'll see with Made in Madagascar, right, there's the anthropologist who uses first person, talks about themselves and their positionality, and they're reflexive about their fieldwork experience, right? Instead, here we have a fictional account, which is nevertheless based upon real cultural practices, norms, values, and beliefs as they exist in contemporary Egypt. I'd also like you to think about how this ethnographic graphic novel is holistic. This is a term that I defined and that we discussed early in this course. In what ways is this text holistic, right? How does it show holism? Remember, holistic means that we as anthropologists, when we do research, we don't just focus on one small theme. Even if we want to write a book about, let's say, milk kin, in the Middle East, you can't think about milk kinship without also studying something about gender, or without also studying how economic roles might be gendered, right? So in other words, as anthropologists, when we do research, we kind of touch on a little bit of everything of the human experience. So even if we're writing about religion, we also have to talk about how that's impacted by language, for example. So again, we don't have the capacity to engage in a small group discussion in this course because it's virtual and asynchronous. But I would encourage you to pause this video and reflect on the ways in which Lissa is nevertheless anthropological. And there is no class engagement quiz. Woohoo! You get out of that in this virtual asynchronous course. So some questions to consider, right? This, if you're struggling to answer these questions, you either did not read the ethnography or you did not read it closely. Where does it take place? Right? So it took place in Cairo, Egypt, but also in the United States. So it's not a traditional village ethnography. This is a term we sometimes use in anthropology to describe ethnographies that take place in a rural area, right, where the research is bounded by the actual boundaries of this small community, right? In this case, we are kind of moving back and forth between the United States and Egypt. What sort of ethnographic research does Shireen Hamdi do? What are some of the major themes that this ethnographic graphic novel addresses? And who are her interlocutors? Again, questions to ask yourself. And if you're struggling to find those answers, I encourage you to go back to your earlier notes to figure out, for example, what do I mean by interlocutor? Right? That's a term you should know by now in this course. So a few more terms. Native anthropologist. It's a term we sometimes use in anthropology to describe the situation where an anthropologist might be doing ethnographic fieldwork within their own community, right? So imagine if it's an example, this might be you're a CNU student and you're doing an ethnography on the culture at CNU. And so we can refer to this as fieldwork at home, right? Because we're doing ethnographic fieldwork, but it's within the context of a place where one considers one's own home. It's important to note, however, that this idea of home, where is home, is easier for some anthropologists to answer than others. For example, what if the anthropologist is an immigrant, is a refugee, right? Has a diasporic lived experience, right? That will make for perhaps a very complicated sense or idea of where home actually is. Again, for some of us, home, it's pretty obvious where that is, but for some anthropologists, it might be less so. This brings us to the concept of reflexivity. Reflexivity is when a researcher, in this case an anthropologist, acknowledges their presence in the field. Right? Again, we're using first person. They refer to themselves as I. But they also refer to their own subject positions. This could be anything from age to their religious identity to their sexuality, and how that might influence the research that they do as anthropologists. Oops, I didn't want to go quite yet. As I often tell students in cultural anthropology, we, the anthropologists, are in the petri dish. We are in our own experiment, right? It's a subjective science, cultural anthropology, so we're never able to be truly outside of our research and objective, right? We, in a sense, are cohabiting the same space as that of our interlocutors and research subjects, and therefore the way that they respond to us, right, will depend in some ways upon our own social positions. Again, imagine if you are a female anthropologist and you want to study Muslim men's prayer practices in Turkey. Right, that would be a real challenge. You might not be able to enter the mosque, right? There are going to be certain things that they don't tell you, right? So reflexivity, again, is when the anthropologist talks about how their positionality impact the way in which they were able to or not able to carry out their research. A few things to note in this ethnographic graphic novel, as well as in Made in Madagascar and other ethnographic texts that we will encounter in this course. Anthropologists often use pseudonyms, by which I mean fake names, to describe our interlocutors, right? So rather, when we write about the people that we do research with, right, we don't write their real name down, right, in a publication because we want to protect their identities. That's what I mean by pseudonyms. We come up with fake names for these people. Generally speaking, it depends on the kind of research that an anthropologist did, but anthropologists typically, especially if we're working with underprivileged, undersourced communities, interlocutors, we try to give back to those communities, right? Because the anthropologist is coming in, extracting information, knowledge, right? Using that to create publications to further their own career, right? There's often anthropologists recognize the need to also sort of give back to that community that gave so much to them. Okay, we are not going to do a peer editing session. I'm going to go back, just leave it here. So again, please be sure to have completed the text, Lissa, before the midterm exam. I'm just going to kind of informally say a few things here about the midterm exam. I'm going to send around a midterm study guide. It is very, very basic and just gives you a sense of some of the topics that might be on the midterm. But the best use of your time in terms of preparation for the midterm would be to go to your notes that you've taken on all the readings as well as the lectures. If you don't have detailed notes on the readings and lectures, please make those and put them in one safe central kind of place. The midterm exam will be composed of multiple choice, fill in the blank, and short answer questions. So it'll be a mix of those. I would set aside at least an hour and a half for you to complete the exam. I haven't decided how long the exam will take, but it shouldn't take much more, if any more at all, than an hour and a half. And you will be able to take that exam virtually on Scholar. Okay, that's all for now, folks. Thanks for listening, and let me know if you have any questions. Take care.